My name is John Van Camp, and I'd like to welcome you to the Right to Read All Books for All People Festival, held on the wonderful grounds here of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Venice. They are one of the two presenting sponsors of today. The other sponsor is the Social Justice Alliance of the Suncoast of Florida. Currently, and you can see some slide, posters that are up there, currently that Social Justice Alliance has 16 faith-based and nonprofit, as well as individual members, and we want to grow it. The mission of the Social Justice Alliance is to recognize and address systemic barriers, promote fairness, and empower marginalized communities to thrive. If you'd like to join us, if you're a part of a pro-democracy organization, or if pro-democracy is in your heart and you'd like to join us, please contact any of the members of that alliance. Because after this, we're going to start to address other issues. We're going to address appropriate gun legislation. We're going to women's health care, voting, any number of other kinds of issues. So this is just kind of the kickoff to the kinds of things that the Alliance will be sponsoring. All right. It really is about, probably you've heard this before, time, talent, and treasure. Time was in April of this past year. The idea came that we could have a banned book festival because we needed to address the censorship of information that was not allowing the free flowing of information and critical thinking. So we came together, a number of organizations, a number of individuals. So that's where the talent comes in. This festival would not be made possible if it weren't really for all of the organizations, all of the individuals who raised their hand and said, I can, I will, I'm going to. Beyond the talent, we also needed treasure. So many of you have stepped up however you could to join and donate to this, to make this festival possible. Actually, I want to make sure that we recognize the real sponsors for this, that put up the bigger dollars so that all of us could. But every single dollar that was contributed was important. Our platinum sponsor is the Unitarian Universalist Association. Our gold sponsor is the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Venice, along with several anonymous volunteers at the gold sponsor level. Our silver sponsor, the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota, Venice Interfaith Community Association, Unitarian Universalist Justice Florida, as well as, again, anonymous volunteers. And not on those signs, but I want to recognize also the bronze the sponsors. They would be Support Our Schools, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Fort Charlotte, Venice Pride, and again, many individuals who donated at a level to be a bronze sponsor. So let's give a round of applause to the volunteers and to the donors that made this possible. So today, here in the sanctuary, we're real fortunate that this is being live streamed to hundreds of people in Florida and beyond. It's being live streamed because the Floridians for Democracy who have a year-long initiative, and that initiative is called Florida Democracy at Risk. So they recognize that our democracy at risk. And throughout Florida, they have these pro-democracy events every month during this year. So if you'd like to learn more about their pro-democracy work, go online to their website, which is floridiansfordemocracy.org. And now, really, to kick things off and to introduce our first author and journalist, I'd like to pass the mic over to David Bronson.
Well, we have glorious weather, and we're going to talk about freedom today. We're going to talk about why we need to fight for them. We're going to talk about why we are having them taken away with some of our speakers, and especially Kent Oliver in the noon talk is also going to talk about what can we do now to fight back to get those freedoms in a way that's practical, like structured out. And he's here from Nashville. He came all the way to share with us to help us make our community a better place and to be able to achieve things like that. We weren't sure when we started 8 months ago thinking about this large-scale event, could we achieve such a thing? But all of a sudden, there were 10 people, 12 people, 18 people, you get the picture, that were helping each other. It takes a village was happening. And we found a way to all, at the very beginning, collaborate with each other. And then we met some writers and publishers like James. We met some historical reenactors like Martha Beretta out on the tent. We have some panelists out there. We have some musicians and other speakers inside here. And we're all thrilled you're here because it makes us look really good. I'll just say one thing about myself. I'm a retired librarian. I'm also a retired bookstores owner. So I'm furious at what has been going on with people taking books out of schools. I can't understand why people think that they have asked me and gotten my rights to take my grandkids' books out just because they think it's a good thing to do, even though they haven't had permission. It's just such a basic thing. It's almost like a decency thing. But we have to fight that power, and we have to fight that politics. And the Right to Read Festival is doing that, we hope, and bringing new people into understanding about, let's say, how good it is, how bad it is, or where is it in between. We want to find out how bad statewide by the end of the day, how much of a pickle are we in with this censorship. We know in Georgia that they're looking at, if the law passes, just happened this week, that they are going to be not only slapping the hands of the librarians in the schools, but they're going to be possibly thinking about imprisoning them if they are purveyors of pornographic, or like Judy Blume's books. You know, Judy Blume in 1978, because one of her characters was a masturbating teenager, she got vilified for years about that. And that's how far it goes back, 45 years in this state. So anyway, I want to also mention before I introduce James that we have an attendee survey. It's a one-pager, and there's a box at the welcome table. And please fill out, if you feel up to it, what we did right, what we did wrong, what needs to be improved, because this is a absolutely very first time. So James Abraham and I became acquainted just recently. I found while I was looking for speakers, James, who has a company called bookbroker.com. I also found out about him that he was a journalist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I grew up for the Milwaukee Journal when we both were much younger men. And that was a connection I was fond of because in those days we had real high regards for that newspaper. It was a big part of our community. He also still writes for the Charlotte County Weekly. And he helps other people write books. And today, he is here to talk about banned books from Maine to the far east coast. No, Maine to the far southwest, and from Portland, Seattle, down to Florida. And then, what's it like in Florida? Statistics, trends, things like that. So would you please welcome James Abraham?
Okay, in the months following World War II, in countless family households across America, a similar scene was acted out. The ex-GI, fresh from the battlefield, turned to Aunt Gertrude at the welcome home dinner and asked her to pass the fucking peas. What? But millions of men and women were exposed to the F word in the military. Some of you are familiar with snafu, situation normal, all effed up, FUBAR, effed up beyond all recognition, and I could go on. They used the word so much that it became second nature. But of course, regular society wasn't ready for an F-bomb. One person who found that out the hard way was Norman Mailer. Now, Norman Mailer was an ambitious writer who decided to enter the military to get enough experience to write a book, which he did. He produced The Naked and the Dead. But the first edition of Naked and the Dead included the F word a whole lot. You know, F to F to F to F to F. The publisher said, we can't do that. Think about Gertrude. What we would do is come up with a different word. They came up with fug, F-U-G. And if you get the early editions of Norman Mailer's book, you'll see fug in there when the Japanese are shooting people. Fug them, you know. I know, you miss a certain je ne sais quoi. Yeah. It was such a popular name, though, that a rock group during the 60s took the name on, the Fugs. And I hope their music was better than their name. Now, my point here is that we've just discussed a case of censorship, but this was censorship based on common conceptions of propriety, of moral decorum, that most people would agree makes sense. And to a degree, that's all right. I feel funny saying that F word in public, and so do most people. But what about when such feelings of sensibility extend into education and literature? What if one man or one woman, the view of what's decorous and right gets too much consideration? That brings us to the Gabblers, a husband and wife team from Texas. Now, the Gabblers are a couple who in the 1960s took one look at their kid's textbook and said, we've got to do something about this. They're actually teaching my kid ideas. They embarked on a crusade against secular humanism. What some books are doing, Norma Gabler said, is giving students ideas, and ideas will never do them as good as basic facts. Further, in her view, students should apparently not show any interest in any fact that's not found in the textbook. Gabler objected to a fourth grade book that urged students to verify facts by consulting other sources on the grounds that it could lead to some very dangerous information. When members of a Texas committee pressed her for some examples, she said, I just don't think questions should be asked unless the information has already been covered in the text. Now, I used to be a textbook editor, and Florida, Texas, and New York were the biggest markets. Back then, Texas was the biggest market in the country. But because of the influence of the Gabblers, we had to tailor our Texas textbooks to suit their sensibilities. Some of the things we did, I'm big on history, and in history, every chapter had to discuss the rise of France, the rise of Europe. But we all know, in reality, history does like that. But we had to dumb it down for the Gabblers and for the students of Texas. Now, that textbooks should be regarded as dangerous weapons in an effort to destroy the minds and moral fiber of our nation's children might strike some of us as surprising. But Mel Gabler, the husband, likes to say, a lot of the books that children are reading today is mental child abuse. Now, the Gablers have no doubt that inferior, improper, and blatantly destructive textbooks are responsible for leaving young people unprepared to face the challenges of adulthood, for destroying confidence and pride in America, for undermining Judeo-Christian values, and for creating a society, and again, this is Mr. Gabler's words, creating a society in which crime, violence, drugs, pornography, venereal disease, abortion, homosexuality, and broken families have all become facts of our everyday existence. Blame it on a book. As he puts it, until textbooks are changed, there is no possibility that crime, violence, VD, and abortion rates will decrease. Textbooks mold nations, he says, because they largely determine how a nation votes, what it becomes, and where it goes. Now, at that point, I'll agree with him. And I think that's part of the motive for the current wave of book banning that we're seeing. And I'll talk about that in a minute. What is true is that their efforts spawn similar movements around the country and are the precursor for Moms for Liberty and groups like that who want to have a role in deciding what our kids read or don't read. I've briefly talked about censorship based on sensibilities, what sounds good, what's nice, what's good in polite company. But what about censorship as power projection? What happens when the state gets into the business of censorship as part of a larger path to control? I ask you to consider the fate of marginalized people the world over. In a pinch, strongmen and dictators always turn to people who look like me, people who are homosexual, to demonize and destroy the other. Consider the Nazis of mid-20th century Germany. It's worth noting that although you've heard of Kristallnacht and you've heard of their violence against the Jews, the first book banning incident actually took place when May 6, 1933, this was before Kristallnacht, Nazi demonstrators raided the libraries of the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft. Try saying that real fast. What it mean? Thank you. I heard you. What that means is Institute of Sexology. The Institute was a privately operated research firm for studies of human sexuality. More than 20,000 books were taken from the shelves and burned days later in the streets by Nazi youth groups. Now, this was a devastating blow to knowledge in general. 20,000 books. But the guy who helped organize it, Magnus Hirschfeld, it destroyed him. He was a Jewish gay man, a pioneer for rights and liberation. And this was during pre-World War II, when Berlin was a pretty wild place. If you've seen Cabarets, a good example of Weimar Germany before Hitler came to power. He actually killed himself after he found out what had happened. The attacks speak to the nature of book burning and censorship, the idea that young minds must be sheltered from the real world, but also force-fed lies to make them easier to manipulate. Now, it's no coincidence that Southern education has always lagged far behind Northern education. That has to do with patterns of migration. When the Pilgrims and the Puritans came over here, the one thing they wanted was their kids not to be fooled like them. In other words, every child had to learn to read the Bible themselves so that there were no intercessors, no priests or middlemen speaking for God. That's why they left England. That's why one of the first things they did when they came to this country was tax themselves to build schools. Meanwhile, in the South, and again, it speaks to migration patterns. You had rich people who came over here and got large blocks of land, but you had a large group of people who came two ways. One was transportation, when they said, get the hell out of England or we're gonna kill you. The other way was indentured servitude, where you sell yourself to somebody for a few years, till you got settled here. At the end of 7 years, they gave you a bit of land and maybe a cow or whatever. But you see right away, the emphasis on settlement was different. People in the North wanted to build real communities of people who thought. People in the South, they wanted wage laborers and slavery. And that, I think, still influences how the two regions of the country approach education. Near the end of my presentation, I'll show some slides showing where books are banned. And it's not surprising that it mainly happens in the South, where people are scared of ideas. What a lot of people don't know is most public education facilities in the South were created after the Civil War by free Black people and allies in the white community who understood that the only way to really compete with the North and with the world was to get some smart kids, some education. The irony of it, of course, is once the Reductionists took over Florida and other southern states after the election of 1876, one of the first things they did was kick the black people out of the schools they founded and developed a separate but equal system, which I could talk about that for days, but I'm sort of riffing. So let me get back to where we are. Closer to home, the book banning tactics of the DeSantis administration has a precedent here with the Johns Committee in the 1950s and 60s. Anybody familiar with the Johns Committee? That's what's so scary about the way they teach history in this country. It's as if it never happened. It would happen in a foreign country. After Richard Nixon rose to fame with the HUAC, the House Un-American Affairs Committee, back during the late 50s and early 60s, a local politician named Charlie Johns in the state legislature decided, hey, we could do that too. The Florida Legislative Investigation Committee was formed by Johns to investigate communists, civil rights movement, academics, the NAACP, allegedly subversive movements. Now, this was during the end of the McCarthy era, where there was a lot of suspicion and paranoia in this country. John set out to expose the homosexuals and lesbians who he said were destroying the minds of young people. Now, Johns was a leader of what used to be called the Pork Chop Gang. Is that familiar at all? Years ago, before the reapportionment of 69, 70, people in Tallahassee, Leon County, Gaston County, Wakulla County, they held all the power in Florida. Redistricting was so bad that Wakulla County, they don't have a lot of people there, but they had the same representation as Orlando. The mouse had come, Orlando had grown by leaps and bounds, but reapportionment kept the state back in the 40s and the 30s. Let's see, where are we here? Okay. Now, the Florida Sun-Sentinel reported in 2019 that the committee persecuted civil rights leaders, university professors, college students, public school teachers, and state employees for imagined offenses against sensibilities of civility. Niceties like due process or the right for counsel or civil liberties were completely ignored. They employed entrapment and blackmail. I used to work for the Tallahassee Democrat, and one of the stories they used to tell around the room was about this photographer with a big mouth who made the wrong person mad. They set him up with a prostitute and burst into the room at the right moment. This is the Johns Committee, just to discredit him. They would do stuff like this. These guys were legislative gangsters. One of the Johns Committee's first tasks was to investigate and punish faculty and staff at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. We called it FAMU, or FAM, the Black College in Tallahassee. The committee sought to find communist links between the NAACP, Florida A&M, and the communists, because Florida A&M and the NAACP led a bus boycott in Tallahassee, similar to the one organized by Martin Luther King in Alabama. The bus boycott is successful. Matter of fact, there's a statue in the Tallahassee bus terminal to Reverend C.K. Steele, who led that movement. But it got so bad that the Johns Committee requested the mailing list of the NAACP. The NAACP had to mail its records out of state so that they wouldn't be seized. And it took intervention by the United States Supreme Court to get the Johns Committee to back off on trying to get into the NAACP's personal business. Now, the Johns Committee, I'm joking about it, but it ruined lives and careers. For example, in March 1959, the chairman of the University of Florida Geography Department, a guy by the name of Sigismund Dietrich, a married man, attempted suicide after being interrogated by the committee's agenda. He was later forced to resign his job. In April of that year, 1959, the university fired at least 15 faculty members and librarians. This was done in secret. Nobody knew it. Over the next year, the university continued investigations and expulsions of students and faculty to pacify the Johns Committee. By 1963, the Johns Committee could boast of having caused the firing of 39 professors and deans, as well as the revoking of teaching certifications for 71 public school teachers, all suspected or admitted homosexuals. I'd like you all to stop and think about what happened to Claudine Gay, the first Black female president at Harvard University. Or what happened to the first female president of Boston University. And if you remember that fool Elise Stefanik actually saying 2 down, 3 to go. In other words, book banning is anti-intellectual, it's anti-thought, it's anti-speech. And when you support that, what you're saying is there's a way of thought that I want everybody in this room to subscribe to because it will make me comfortable. Now, if I had that kind of power, everybody in this room would buy me a martini. And I'd be very happy.
I'll buy you one.
Hey, so let's go right now. But anyway. Now, there's always some humor to be found in history, even a grimace history. And the Johns Committee is responsible for producing one of the most popular pieces of literature ever produced by Florida government. It was called Homosexuality and Censorship in Florida. But it was printed, let me call that up so you can see that. Yeah, you see it up in the corner? And it's John's in the center showing off. It was printed in purple. It became known as the Purple Book. And if you wanted to learn how to be a homosexual or where to find them, get a copy. More than 2,000 copies of the report were printed. Some of it reportedly was sold as pornography in New York City, of all places. Now, the report has some scary stuff in it. For example, the best and current estimate of active homosexuals in Florida is 60,000 individuals. The plain fact of the matter is that a great many homosexuals have an insatiable appetite for sexual activities and find special gratification in the recruitment to their rights of youth. Here we have that old saw of grooming. Don't let them near your boys or your girls. The homosexual's goal, and this is from the Purple Book, the homosexual's goal is to bring over the young person, to hook them for homosexuality. A veteran investigator of homosexual activity said, "We must do everything in our power to create one thing in the minds of every homosexual, and that's to keep their hands off our children." As if every homosexual is thinking about kids. Sometimes they're a pain in the ass, but anyway. If we don't act soon, we'll wake up one morning and find they're too big to fight. They may be already. I hope not. We hope that many citizens organizations in Florida will use this report to prepare their children to meet the temptation of homosexuality lurking today in the vicinity of nearly every institution of learning. Now, that kind of fear always finds currency, and it's certainly finding currency today. If you remember Pizzagate or whatever. Yeah, I'll take the pizza. But anyway, some of the claims that unrestrained, rampant homosexuals would prey on children were later repeated and widely publicized by Anita Bryant. Remember her? Now, what you may forget, now I mentioned history goes like this. And what you may forget is that Dade County had a gay rights ordinance. But in 1977, thanks to Anita Bryant and the anti-gay people, they repealed that ordinance. That's the way history really works. When we take our foot off the pedal, when we relax, Russ never sleeps. And people like that come out the woodwork. Again, just an aside, thank you all for coming, and I hope you all get out there and do something to make sure we don't go back. But let's get back to the program. Lawmakers were outraged at what the media was calling the Purple Book, state-sponsored pornography, and it led to the downfall of the Johns Committee. The committee was disbanded July of 1965. But if you want to find out what they did, if you want to watch them ruin careers, talk about people like dogs, 30,000 pages of testimony, document, and records are still available in the state archives. And they're open to public record. Again, it scares me that no one in this audience remembers the Johns Committee. It's the kind of thing that's happening right now. Can't you see it? And the reason it's happening is because there's no memory of what happened before. So Google Johns Committee. Don't take it from me. So here we are today in history, at a place where fascists are familiar with. It's a place where book banning, book burning, being done at an unprecedented rate. Education is designed not to educate now, but to indoctrinate. Governor Ron DeSantis' book banning is particularly pernicious because it doesn't explicitly ban certain books, but makes teachers, librarians, and educators parties in taking books off the shelf. Anybody remember this press conference? Oh, this infuriated me. He called a press conference to say the whole idea of book banning in Florida is a big hoax. The state of Florida has not banned a single book. I, as governor, has not banned a single book. And he's absolutely right. But what he's done is create a situation where librarians, educators, teachers fear for their professional career if they put the wrong book on the shelf. Now, this is pretty hard to read, but this is a very cleverly worded law. This is the Don't Say Gay law that initiated the spate of book bannings. Now, if you read it, there's no mention in there about a single specific book. But what it does is hold educators liable if kids get a book with, say, a boy masturbating in it, or Frederick Douglass killing white people, anything that would offend the sensibilities of a small group of people. Yeah, a smirking DeSantis held several press conferences where he denied banning books, but the books are being banned. We all know it. That's why we're here today. That's why there are 2 court cases right now winding their way through our court system. I don't have much faith in them because the court system, like the legislature, is stacked by Republicans. Now, what really worries me about this is people are saying publicly what they were uncomfortable saying publicly years ago. The state attorney general, in filing briefs against the 2 lawsuits I mentioned earlier, had this to say: public school systems, including their libraries, convey the government's message. She sees government speech as protected speech in the sense that if you use any government institution, that government can control the ideas, the reading materials, and everything that the student is exposed to. In other words, school libraries, as Ashley Moody, our Florida Attorney General, sees them, are a forum for government speech, not a place for free expression. Now, the most abject example of this kind of censorship for power occurred right here in Sarasota, well, close to Sarasota. That's the case of Bridget Ziegler. Bridget Ziegler was basically a handbag sales lady and a cute blonde who, through a variety of mechanisms, wound up finding Moms for Liberty, which campaigned for the restrictive book laws. A large part of Moms for Liberty's campaign was to pass the Don't Say Gay law. But then we found out that Bridget Ziegler, we have a case where we see that Bridget Ziegler, and I don't really care what she does at home with a cat or a gerbil or whatever, but what's important is when she decides that she can do what she wants, but there's a different rule for the rest of society. What that speaks to, this is less about sexuality, and it's all about power. The power to control people. Do what I say and don't look at what I do. That speaks to the real cruelty of such laws. Lives are destroyed, suicide happened, family broke up, kids are devastated solely because someone wants to be president or mayor or dog catcher. And too many people in this society are too quick to listen to fools like that. I brought along some stats that I just want you to look at, and I'll just go through these briefly. Now, if you look at these categories, the most books banned are banned, quote, for violence. But what is violence? If you remember Where the Wild Things Are, has been banned. And I grew up in a very tough section of Baltimore. One thing I know is violence is a part of life. And as soon as the kids understand that life isn't about Chucky Bear and happy times, the sooner kids understand that, I think the better. I think this kind of shielding is wrong. It does nothing for young people. When you look at what specific books are banned, it's an overlapping territory. Books that deal with gay or lesbian issues, you see that at the top. But the problem is the most realistic books that deal with those subjects also include sometimes violence. And when we say violence, sometimes it's verbal violence. Get the hell out of here. And so it's such a broad category that librarians are just stuck. What do I leave in? What do I take out? I'm sure you've heard of a district that considered banning the Bible. And the funniest thing I heard, that nasty Bill Riley is actually whining now because his book is banned. And the biggest trend is more and more books that deal with sexual issues, non-traditional sex. I hate using that term, but you know what I'm saying. That's just increasing. The most banned books are young adult books. These are books, when you say young adult, you're talking about 12 up until you graduate from school. Now, those are some unbelievably formative years. I remember when I was that age, I thought I was ugly. I thought I talked funny. I thought nobody liked me. I was a walking bundle of feelings and nerves, and most young people are like that. And that's the worst time in the world to start channeling them toward a particular philosophy or ideology. But by the same token, it's when they're most vulnerable and they're most susceptible to that sort of stuff. Just a case in point. Every year in the legislature, there's a movement to pass a law saying that motorcyclists have to wear helmets. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Probably because we don't ride motorcycles. But people who ride motorcycles, I think they're a little crazy. They don't have the wind whipping past their ears or whatever. The law never gets out of committee. But the very first time they proposed a law saying that kids have to wear bicycle helmets, done deal. It's over. No question. Because there was no constituency. I think we're the constituency for banned books. I don't see anyone in here who looks young enough to still have kids in school. I know, I think my kids are in school, but no. But that doesn't mean we abdicate the responsibility for our kids' minds. I can't tell you what to do or ask you what to do, but I'll close my presentation by saying what you're doing right now, showing up here, being a part of this, is a step in the right direction. Thank you. If there are any easy questions, I'll take those. If not, oh, yes.
Hi, sorry I'm a little quiet. I'm Luca, I'm a journalist, and into your talk, I was curious, is there anything about those bands that challenges or authority that you think is missing from media coverage?
Say that again, please.
Anything about those bands with challenges you think are missing from media coverage right now?
Journalists don't read books. Really, you don't. It sort of scares the journalists to see a book. So I don't think they understand the magnitude of what's happening. I think they're covering it as a political thing. And when you cover something like this solely as a political phenomena, you're playing both sides are equal. That this other side has a legitimate reason for discourse, and they don't. I would like to see journalists cover it more on an individual basis and talk to families that are torn, that have problems, talk to librarians and get the real story. Has anyone here read in any newspaper about how the law makes educators agents in what you call them banning books? We don't really know that. And so I'd like to see more coverage of that. I hope that speaks to your question. About 40 years ago, the Koch brothers and others came up with a strategy to promote Republican values. And that strategy involved working on the lower levels, getting in the state houses, and start there and work your way up. And they've been very successful. And so we do have to start with elections, with voting. Any other questions?
One of my questions is the allocation of resources for education and how that has been cut and how that is directly related to the ability to manipulate not just children but also adults. And also I was thinking, why can't we use the fact that those resources are going directly to fund the military and how much money is sunk into the military in this country? So why can't we turn that on its head? If the argument is that it's violence in the books that are banned, how are we putting so much money into violence, both within and without our borders?
You just spoke to just the fallacious nature of that argument. It's not that they're scared kids are going to read it. Yeah.
Of course, but why can't we use that in the same way that it's being used on us?
Because we don't work as hard as they do.
Well, I would say that we work very hard,
No, ma'am.
just to survive.
No, ma'am. What I mean is that
I know.
when it comes to elections, these Republicans have plans, and they're serious about them.
They play the long game.
They play the long game.
We're not organized.
Yes, yes. We'll get together during an election year and canvass, holler, scream, get out to vote. But in the off years, during the committee work, where we should be doing something. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and call it quits because I can smell those gyros over here. I want to thank you all very much.
We are going to be talking about freedom a lot today, and we're going to have some other topics too, but I don't know about you, but all of us retired librarians and teachers and activists and others who formed this alliance, who in turn formed the Right to Read Festival, All Books for All People, have been very perturbed about what we've seen the last year or two and what's happening in this community. We are here to support librarians, school teachers, journalists, readers, writers, and publishers. Thanks. And I wasn't going to just do a straight intro for Kent because I ran across this book last week that I read. It's a Newbery Award-winning book called The Eyes in the Impossible, and it's about freedom. And some of you who are library people in the crowd might have already read it. Let me tell you what it's about very quickly, and then you get the real speaker. This book is about freedom because it's a wild dog, very wild, in a very large forest north of San Francisco. His name is Johannes. He's not only a wild dog in this vastness of the wilderness, but he can go faster than the speed of light. At least he'll tell you. So he's this magical, fast, wild dog. But the thing he really wants to be is free and wild. Well, that goes on, and he meets all these other animal characters, and they all have speech. So they all have this dialogue together, and they all talk about a lot of things, but they end up talking about how nice it is to be free. And they keep an eye on the park rangers, and the park rangers don't even know they're doing it. Well, one day when Johannes goes out to the edge of the trees where he's not supposed to go, he is watching somebody unload a truck of rectangles. That's what his dog's eyes see. It's actually artwork being unloaded to go into this new building that had been built in this large park. And for some reason, he was mesmerized by art. Maybe because he was a really smart Johannes. I don't know. But he was so mesmerized, he froze. And when he froze, click, click, his collar and his leash were on, and that was the animal control guy over there and here, and he had his freedom fully taken away. And what a feeling that is for a dog to have their freedom taken away. And what a feeling it is for us to be looking at our grandchildren's and our children, our grandchildren and our children, not having a say sometimes in what their family can read. That's going on here right now. And that's one of the things that Kent's going to talk about. He's going to talk about what's it like in Florida. How can we, as communitarian thinking people, be actively changing how we do that? How can we make an inroad into turning this around? And what's the background? Where did this come from? When? How? So, I just want to say a few things about Kent, that he is president of some of the key organizations in this country that have to do with uniting against book bans and intellectual freedom. He is now a senior fellow with the American Library Association, which means he was chosen along with a few other people once he retired after 51 years being a librarian to still be active in our career, which we chose, most of us for passionate reasons. And I imagine he's very proud about that, and he's doing really good work. And one of the things he does is he comes out and shares what he's going to share today in communities all over the country. And he also works training high-level American Library Association managers and others in a special group about how to counteract book banning and things like that. So please welcome Kent Oliver.
Well, thank you, David. First of all, thank you for asking me to come down. I'm going to be honest with you, when I'm getting ready to do a presentation, I'm a little nervous, especially when I'm not going out to visit with active librarians or people that I know are librarians. And anyway, I just like the vibe outside. I mean, doesn't it feel good to be with our own tribe, which is kind of what we do now these days. But as David mentioned, my working title is Senior Fellow for the American Library Association. And I work with what is called the Public Policy and Advocacy Office. And for those of you that are former librarians or librarians out there, that's the office that used to be known as the Washington office. And it's located in Washington, D.C. And my primary job is working to support Unite Against Book Bans, which you'll hear more about later. And I handed out a few of the bookmarks, and if you didn't get one, there's a whole table of UABB swag that I hope you will grab on the way out, because I don't want to haul it back. My prior career was that of a public librarian and a public library director. And I'm originally a Kansan. I take it myself as a Kansan, but I've also worked in Missouri, Ohio, and Tennessee. And I have been active in state and national library associations. David was kind enough to say how long I've been doing it. 51 years, it goes by very quickly, and I began as a shelter at the Topeka Public Library. But I've been privileged to be a member of ALA's executive board, chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee, president of the Freedom to Read Foundation, and president of a couple of state library associations as well. And I'm throwing that out there simply to say that I have been around the block a few times with library issues, and my passion has always been supporting the First Amendment. So today, what I'd like to cover for you is to visit a little bit about first the historical perspective on libraries and intellectual freedom and censorship, and then talk a little bit about the book challenge atmosphere that we're seeing in the United States today, and then give you a little bit of a glimmer of hope is some of the good things that we're seeing in opposition to this terrible thing that's happening. But living in this part of Florida, I think you guys are going to understand this. But I want to make sure you're clear about this. I believe that everything in life comes back to the game of baseball. And it's the basis for our society. See if this works. It does. So in 1989, a movie was released called Field of Dreams, and it was based on the book by W.B. Kinsella and Shoeless Joe. And that starred Kevin Costner, Amy Madigan, and James Earl Jones. And how many of you remember seeing it? Surely almost everybody's seen the movie, right? So if you haven't seen it in a while, somewhat buried in this movie is a PTA meeting scene where members of the community are demanding that a book of smut and S-H-I-T by an author named Terrence Mann, that was a book about the 60s and peace and love, be removed from the library. And so does anybody remember the line, "At least he isn't a book burner, you Nazi cow"? Amy Madigan says that to the person that's trying to get the book removed. So I remember the first time that I saw this movie, and this scene just jumped out at me. And I thought, yeah, but also thinking that Amy's reaction in this movie was a little bit over the top. And the scene gave you a little bit of the passion that both sides of the book banning issue come from. It also gave you a sense of how hostile that situation can become. And especially the PTA or a school board meeting. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that I believe that situation, that environment has never been more true today than it was in that movie. In 2022, the Tennessee Library saw a disturbing trend in our Tennessee Assembly session, as well as in some local school boards and school systems. And it was driven by right-wing conservatives in our state. And like Florida, Tennessee is a far-right partisan state with an extremely conservative governor, Bill Lee. And since 1922, there has been an aggressive effort to push to either limit or remove materials from school curriculums and or libraries. And there have been laws passed both at the local and at the state level. The most famous you may have heard about is the McMinn County School Board voted to remove Mouse in the spring of 2022. And that's Art Spiegelman's graphic novel depicting the Holocaust, with the Jews represented by mice and their Nazi captors as cats. And they were wanting to remove this book from the school curriculum, which they did, a decision that garnered attention across the nation. In 2022, there were at least 5 bills introduced in the Tennessee legislature which sought to define and or limit a school library's ability to independently develop their collections. And I have a little bit of data later on in this presentation about what's going on now, but this was just the tip of the iceberg. This was just when it was starting to become very public, and we were starting to see these efforts in school districts. But it was in this environment that my library, the Nashville Public Library, launched the I Read Banned Books campaign. So why did we do that? I was talking with somebody earlier, maybe it was David, but just the idea. If you're familiar with Tennessee at all, there are 2 blue dots in Tennessee, and that would be Nashville and Memphis, and the rest is red. And frankly, we haven't had a lot of trouble with book bannings in Nashville itself. But the reasons why we did it in Nashville and why I launched the I Read Banned Books campaign was this. We felt like we wanted to be assertive and advocate action before it came to us. We wanted the public to be aware back in the spring of 22 what was starting to happen. We wanted to go on the offense instead of be defensive. And we wanted to ensure that Nashville would continue to be a blue dot. The reasons for the introduction of the bills that I have been mentioning is that they span the political and philosophical spectrums. There was an opposition to school libraries and curriculum materials on topics ranging from anti-police, LGBTQIA+, and an emphasis on social justice, to use as racial slurs, cause nightmares, and promoting a religious viewpoint. My personal intellectual freedom journey really began in the 1980s. And if you reflect back, I see it in this room, we probably have some librarians that were practicing during that time. At that time, librarians were mainly working through parental challenges around sex, drugs, women's rights, internet access, privacy, and rock and roll, literally. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Sex and books parents didn't want their children to read and see, MTV videos, parental rating systems for movies, filtering, all of that was part of the discussion at that point. Other than conservatives such as Phyllis Schlafly and Tipper Gore, I bet some of you haven't heard those names in a while, I personally didn't get a sense there was a galvanized, effective, organized effort other than maybe the American Eagle Forum to ban books like we're seeing today. More of a concern by some parents about what their children were reading, seeing, and hearing. And of course, in the 80s, we could reflect back on the 1950s and the McCarthy era. So if this slide illustrates anything, and something that is important to all of us to understand, is that book challenges and book bans are not about the books themselves, but what about those books represent. Book bans and censorship is about ideas. Book challenges no longer focus on one or two titles by concerned parents, but 50 to 100 at a time from an organized, deliberate playbook. I'm going to pause here for a second. It's hard to take in the slide. This slide is up on ALA's OIF website, and it just kind of blows your mind, because if you think about certainly a public library and school libraries, this is all the things that inform people. This is what creates inquisitive minds and thinking. And this is what our society is made up of. This is an older slide, but I decided to use it today anyway. But what it really illustrated a year and a half ago almost, and I could replicate the slide today with new instances, but it's the world that libraries live in today. The top one here is about a banned books display at a library. And it's just about people protesting and trying to get a display taken down. The third one down is a LGBTQ display that people were trying to get rid of in a pride exhibit. Local libraries explain policies on banned books. Libraries are having to explain the process that we use to review books. Committee to recommend retaining 2 challenge books in Conway School District Library, and that's in Arkansas. And that was a situation where actually a committee charged to review the books was saying, yes, we're going to keep them. Vote to decide future of Craighead County Jonesboro Public Library. There's a whole legal case behind that. But basically, due to book challenges and objections to the content of books in the library, the community was trying to shut the library down. And Dearborn Public Library has issued a new public library review process. So they're trying, this is what we were seeing a lot of over the last year and a half, is that school districts are changing their approach to ban books. There are three cases that I'm going to mention specifically that were not on that slide. And they just emphasize what's going on. More recently in Michigan, there was a library that you may have heard of in a little bit north of Detroit, where they actually nearly lost all of their funding because people were objecting to the content of their books. And the librarian and library board stood up. And eventually, after I believe a third try on levies, they were able to get their money. But there was such great opposition from people in favor of book bans. In Idaho, we have seen people show up at public library board meetings carrying guns and physically threatening librarians. In Plano, Texas, which is a happier story, again, there was a defunding effort by the county commissioners. A number of, they had a public hearing. The majority of the community showed up in favor of the library. At the same time, there was a court case by a number of citizens in the community. And I'm happy to report that they won their court case to keep the library open as well and to get the books back on the shelf. So that was an instance where we had local citizens standing up. They didn't want their library closed, and they went to court, and they were successful to get the books back. Okay, I don't know if you can see all of those, but this is another example of some of the books that you're seeing that are being challenged. And Genderqueer, which I believe is on one of the slides that's going between sessions. Sherman's Alexi's The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Lawn Boys, one that you've heard of. Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. What we're consistently seeing are books that are challenged, having to do with the cultural ideas that I mentioned earlier. And almost all of these, as David was talking about, are award-winning books. A lot of Newbery Award winners here, Prince Award winners, that sort of thing. And again, these are not classic books necessarily, but they're books that speak very much to our society and helping young adults grow up and understand their sexuality and be able to go through the cognitive process to understand. So this is the Library Bill of Rights. And if you're not a librarian, you may think, well, these librarians just go in there and they just select books and good luck. Yeah, librarians are laughing. But we do have a Library Bill of Rights. And one of the things actually that the Intellectual Freedom of ALA does is develop interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights as we go on in history and are reacting to situations. But I want to hit a couple of these for you because I think they're important. The first one, books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Material should not be excluded because of origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. The library should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. Libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. Libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas, which is why I'm here today. A person's right to use libraries should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. Libraries, which make exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available to the public, they serve should make such facilities available on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or the affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. All peoples, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. This was amended not too long ago at the bottom. But I guess the point I'd like to make, a few key points in there, and maybe to sum it up. Libraries are all about access for everybody in the community. And the books they contain within a library are not just the popular ideas, or we're going to take a vote and 60% think these should be here and 40% don't, so we're going to. It's about representing everybody in the community. And there may be value in obscure work that will help somebody navigate their life and growing up. So we want to make sure everything is there. Another, frankly, a lie or disinformation that's been going on lately is that the way books are selected. There's been a little bit of a debate within our profession, but the reality is libraries try and build nonpartisan collections. It goes back to the representation piece and the access piece. We're not interested in building a democratic collection or all viewpoints represented. That was kind of like a bad cell phone call, wasn't it? But the point being, again, everything is welcome in the library. And it goes on to displays and that sort of thing. I wanted to visit the First Amendment a little bit today because we forget about it sometimes. We just say, oh, there's the First Amendment, and we represent the First Amendment. But it's really, it boils down to Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And it applies to states through the 14th Amendment. Does everybody in here understand the 14th Amendment at all? It's sometimes called the Reconstruction Amendment. And what it's really about is an equitable society that everybody is equal under the law. It came about after the Civil War and because of what was happening with Reconstruction in the South. But it does apply to adults and minors. Everybody is equal under the First Amendment. And that's been one of the areas where libraries have had a challenge over the years, is just having people understand that a 10-year-old child has as much right under the First Amendment as a 50-year-old adult. So what's happening in the library world? And how are libraries and librarians organized to be combating censorship and the politics of eliminating the freedom to read? This slide is about the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom. It's the world where, again, some of you were librarians at one time. You heard the name Judy Krug. This was Judy Krug's office for years and years. And right now, Deborah Caldwell Stone is the head of the Office of Intellectual Freedom. She worked for Judy, and she does a great job. But what does OIF do? First of all, they support librarians. If the Venice Public Library were having a book challenge and they wanted to, they could contact OIF and they would help them develop strategies to fight censorship. And again, the important thing to remember about ALA is that we do not come into localities and help fight censorship unless we are invited. Because we know that, unfortunately, the stigma that the name or the initials ALA have now in fighting censorship in some areas of the country. The other thing that ALA does is help describe and define the Library Bill of Rights within the profession. And again, as I mentioned, there's some librarians now that have decided in reaction to the censorship attempts, well, we're just going to build a liberal collection. And that is not what ALA supports. That is not what ALA wants to happen. They want collections that represent the community and are nonpartisan. So these are my guys right now. I'm currently a member of the Freedom to Read Foundation board. And a lot of people become confused about the Freedom to Read Foundation. It is a nonprofit organization separate from the American Library Association. It has its own board of directors that include publishers, authors, and related professions. And the thing that the Freedom to Read Foundation can do that the ALA does not do because of its status is that it will go in and file legal actions to oppose censorship and opposition to the First Amendment. For instance, they were part of the Plano incident that I mentioned in that court case. There was a case in Arkansas recently that the Freedom to Read Foundation was involved in. What this chart really does is gives you a sense of how severe the uptick in challenges have been. And these are ALA numbers. And I thought I'd mention this. If you were sitting here between sessions and you saw data on censorship that was going up on those slides, there are a number of organizations right now that are tabulating data around book challenges and in different ways. And PEN America has a set of their numbers, and we have a set of our numbers. And we really all need to get together and determine and define things the same. But these are the ALA numbers. And I have the 2022 numbers there because that is the complete set for a year. But just to give you an idea of what we saw in 2023, I haven't seen the final numbers for 23 yet. The preliminary data, January through August last year, there were 695 challenges reported. And that's when somebody actually comes in and says, we're going to take a book out, and they go through the entire reconsideration process for a library or school. There were 1,915 unique titles challenged. I'm going to say that again, 1,915 unique titles. That's almost 2,000 titles. There were 11 states where more than 100 titles were challenged, and 49% of challenges happened to public libraries at that point in the year, and by the end of August. And 92% of censorship attempts involved multiple titles. So a significant number there is the 49% of challenges happened in public libraries. Without becoming too technical, what goes on is that as we were seeing the start of the spike, almost all the challenges were going after school libraries. And public libraries were deemed as kind of a space where you weren't going to get to the books no matter what. Well, that has changed, and the bad guys have changed their tactics, and they're now going after public libraries as well. So if a student was not able to get a book in a school library, they used to be able to immediately go to the public library and find that book. That is what the other side is trying to stop right now. They're trying to stop the availability of those books that are no longer in schools. As we think about the mind map earlier and the ideas being challenged, what we're seeing now is state by state, a lot of states have a proliferation of bills trying to limit access to books and the ideas that they represent. And again, this is 2023, and I know the numbers are substantially higher this year. I know, for instance, in Tennessee, I think we have half a dozen that are what I would call book censorship or idea censorship bills. And I know here in Florida, you have quite a few. Earlier, I was talking about how censorship was different in the 80s when I began, and really even the last few decades from what we've seen in the last few years. And this slide gives you an idea into the organized efforts to ban books. And again, this is one slide out of multiple that I could have shown you. But what this slide represents are coordinated groups and efforts, organizations that are trying to remove books from your schools and from public libraries. And they are all pretty much using the same tactics. We hear most about the Moms for Liberty. And certainly a lot of their tactics are being adopted. And they're also very, I hate to say good, but they're very resourceful about changing tactics as they see things that will be effective. I have read a little bit about this, and I believe it to be true, but the anti-abortion group or effort that occurred a number of years ago, what I read is that the Moms for Liberty have really adopted a lot of the tactics that came about during their efforts in the anti-abortion movement. And based on what I'm seeing, I'd say that's probably correct. But what these groups also do is they employ hardcore advocacy and lobbying tactics. They use misinformation and disinformation to deliver their message, and they have been winning state houses, school boards, and local government seats. They've been trying to get appointed to public library boards and other places. Removing illegal defense to obscenity prosecutions. Very quickly, there's a difference between obscenity and pornography when we're in this fight legally. Every state has an obscenity statute, and we call that legal obscenity. So a book, for instance, cannot have content that would fall under that and be defined within that. And the fact of the matter is public libraries and school libraries do not have books that would be considered legally obscene. Pornography is subjective. And if you use the term pornography to describe a particular book, that is, in your eyes, it is not a legal term. So if you hear a government official say that's pornographic, that has no legal standing. But we're seeing the states try and redefine their legal processes around obscenity. Bans on acquisition or distribution of sexualized content, private right of action. Those are civil lawsuits. They're actually part of the 14th Amendment. Restriction of regulation of digital resources. Again, libraries are very much about digitization now, correct? So that's a place where people are trying to go after content. Use of administrative regulations to remove or restrict disfavored books. Erosion of minors' rights, access privacy. That's the First Amendment comment that I made earlier. And deprofessionalization of librarianship. And most librarians have a master's of library or library and information science. And part of our important process as we do collection development is based on a very professional approach to that. Well, some of these laws are trying to remove that so that anybody could be a librarian in a school, for instance. So these are more policy attacks we're seeing. Again, the elimination of long-standing legal protections for librarians and educators. Many states have statutes that say librarians cannot be prosecuted under obscenity laws. Curriculum, material, and program censorship. Redefinition of what parental rights would be. Excessive filtering of the internet, and private rights of action that I mentioned earlier. So in the 2023 elections, we saw voter rejection of book ban rhetoric in a lot of the local elections. What we started to see was a movement for people to retake their school boards and their library boards, especially back east. We saw successful challenges to library censorship. We saw the use of anti-discrimination laws and regulations upheld in courts. We saw a defense against censorship by using the Office of Civil Rights and DOE. We saw EEOC complaints around book censorship and introduction of federal and state right to read legislation. And there is a law in the Congress right now that is called a right to read. I don't know that it's going to pass, but we're also seeing librarians and library associations are introducing right to read laws at the state level as well in support of the First Amendment. So what are libraries doing right now? Is there an organized effort to fight book bans? And how can we stop this incursion into our democracy? So UABB, Unite Against Book Bans, is a national initiative to empower readers everywhere to stand together and fight against censorship. And actually what I do on a daily basis is I work with something in ALA's policy core to help librarians advocate against censorship. And this year, we're going to start moving out into partner organizations and working with them as well. But when you visit the UABB website, it's very much about, again, advocacy tools, toolkits to help people on a local level combat censorship. But UABB is a critical tool right now. And is anybody in this room a member of UABB? I have an opportunity. I hope that you will all consider there's a QR code on the bookmark I handed out, and more out there. You can also go online, Unite Against Book Bans, and join. But particularly what UABB is trying to do is build a database of people that are concerned about censorship. And if all of you folks, for instance, were to join and there was an effort to ban books in this area of Florida, by having your zip code, we would know that you are interested in that, and you would get an email blast so that you would be aware of it. These are some of the partners, the organizational partners that are part of UABB. And this is only a small section. And if any of you are members of national organizations that you think would be interested, please let me know, because we will reach out to them. This is some of the messaging that we use when we're talking to librarians, but frankly, just the public in general. Reading is a foundational skill critical to future learning and to exercising our democratic freedoms. Parents have the right to guide their children's reading, but parents should not be making decisions for other parents' children. Specifically, a small group of parents should not dictate what other books other people's children are allowed to read. We can trust individuals to make their own decisions about what they want to read and believe. And books are tools for understanding. There's a lot of other messaging associated with UABB, but I think these are some of the more critical messages. But what we really want people to be able to do is to confront issues and be mission focused when they are advocating and fighting the challenges. We like to see local coordination like you guys are doing today. You've got so many great people collaborating in this part of the world. Coalition building, communication, adaptability and responsiveness, and also vigilance. Because UABB also counts on local members to let them know when things are going on. This is a real critical part. And again, I was talking about this already. But we support voter registration of people that support the First Amendment. And we want to make sure that there's valid information provided so you know what people are running on for your school boards and your county commissions. We have a candidate questionnaire, candidate pledge, all of that information. But there is, in fact, a toolkit on the UABB website when you're talking about elections. And it was kind of exciting to have a candidate here today that was so interested in opposing censorship. I think, to me, this is one of the most important documents in the library world, or actually in the freedom to read world. And it reads, "The freedom to read is continuously under attack. Private groups and public authorities are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label controversial views, to distribute lists of objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. These actions apparently rise from a view that our national tradition of free expression is no longer valid, that censorship and suppression are needed to counter threats to safety or national security, as well as to avoid the subversion of politics and the corruption of morals. The American Library Association and the Association of American Publishers first released a statement in 1953, but it could very well have been written today because it's very appropriate for what's happening. I'm going to ask you all two questions before I give you a chance to ask me a few questions in the few minutes that we have left. What are each of you going to do when the censor comes for books at your library or your school library? And will you be fearless and assertive in the defense of the freedom to read? Because we certainly need you to do that. Thank you all for having me here, and I can take a few questions.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 115 program here in the sanctuary. Today, we are lucky enough to have Rob Sanders. He is from an area near Tampa, and so he's kind of a regional guy. And when we called him up or emailed him, he said, yes, I would do that right away. And you know, that was our experience with 4 or 5 others. They said, tell me a few more things. And they said, yes, we'd like to do that book festival. That was one of the energy things that kept us going. So the people speaking in the tent now fit into that category. All 3 of those panelists, no question. It's a yes, how can we help? And so Rob, who is an award-winning children's book writer, nonfiction and fiction. And you see his Pride book with Harvey Milk. And you're going to learn about the history of the Pride flag, which was built in San Francisco. In San Francisco. And will you also be talking about kind of where children's books are now? Okay. Okay. Well, maybe that's the only introduction I'll do then, is that we're thrilled that a man with his writing talents and caliber and awards is here in Venice to join us for this hour of the Right to Read Festival. So please welcome Rob Sanders.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. It's good to be here with you. One thing David didn't say that you'd be interested in is I'm a retired school teacher. I retired at the end of 2020. That's pandemic year. And was mostly in 4th grade language arts teacher. I was a writing resource teacher for a few years. That means you got a cart and you roll your cart from room to room and work with different teachers and students. One year, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was teaching 2nd grade. I loved it. But my principal moved me back to 4th grade after that. But you had to do online with those 2nd graders when the pandemic struck. We would do morning meeting every day at 8:15. My kids could not understand that though they were at home, we were having school. So the thing I said most frequently was, you're going to have to put on your pants. We're at school. No, Mr. Sanders, we're not at school. We're at home. Yes, I know, but we're at school right now. I'm glad to be here with you. Anytime I get to talk about books, I want to be there. Anytime we get to talk about making sure books are in the hands of kids, I definitely want to be there. So I'm going to leave time for questions and answers at the end, but since I'm a teacher, there's really nothing you could do that would disturb me. So if you've got a question, something needs to be clarified, not hearing well, I need to speak up, slow down, whatever, just let me know and we'll take care of that. Since this is a reading festival, I thought the best way to start was by reading a book. And I'm going to read Pride. This was my first nonfiction. I had already published some fictional picture books before that. let me give you a little bit background on that too. That I've been writing my whole life since I was in college, but I had not started into writing children's books until I turned 50. So the 20-some books I have out and under contract have come out in the last 15 years. You can do the mental math there to figure out my age. So Pride was the first nonfiction book. It's illustrated by Stephen Salerno, and since it's a picture book, you need to see the pictures. Just hearing the words is not good enough. Published by Random House. Here we go. Harvey Milk was an ordinary man, but he had an extraordinary dream. That dream would change history. Harvey dreamed that everyone, even gay people, would have equality. He dreamed that he and his friends would be treated like everyone else. He dreamed that one day people would be able to live and love as they pleased. With his New York accent, there we go. With his New York accent, Harvey talked to everyone about his dream. His voice boomed, his body bounced with energy and excitement. Some people listened, a few agreed, most did not. But Harvey's big voice and his big dream wouldn't be stopped. He discovered that the best way to change laws is to help make laws. In 1977, Harvey Milk took a big step toward that dream when he became one of the first openly gay people to be elected to political office in the United States. Harvey and his friends planned marches to protest inequality and unfair laws, and just days before one of the marches, Harvey had an idea. A symbol, he thought. We need a symbol that shows who we are and how we feel. Something to carry during the march. Something to make people feel they're part of a community. Something to give people hope. Something extraordinary. Harvey knew an artist who could help, Gilbert Baker. Harvey asked. Gilbert said, "We need a flag." Volunteers arrived to help Gilbert's design come to life. Together they dipped fabric into large barrels filled with vivid, vibrant dyes. They cut and pieced and sewed until Harvey, Gilbert, and the other activist had a flag. A flag with 8 colorful stripes. A flag that Harvey hoped would give hope. On June 25th, 1978, when it was time for the march, a breeze stirred in San Francisco. The flag unfurled. The wind blew. The flag fluttered, flapped, and flew, a rainbow as bright and unique as the men and women who marched behind it led the march. Harvey and the people asked for equality. They asked to be treated like everyone else. They asked to live and love as they pleased. They hoped the march would make a difference. Harvey was proud of the flag and proud of himself. He hoped others would be proud too. 5 months later, on the morning of November 27, 1978, Harvey and the mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, were assassinated. Their lives were taken by a man who did not think like Harvey, or feel like him, or love like him. The flag did not fly on that dark, sad night. Instead, thousands and thousands of people marched silently, carrying candles. The candlelight wove through the streets of San Francisco, up and down hills and around city buildings, a mile of glowing candlelight in honor of 2 lives lost. That could have been the end of Harvey's dream and the colorful flag, but it wasn't. More rainbow flags were created. Some of the colors changed. 8 stripes became 6 stripes. But the meaning of the flag did not change. It was a flag of equality. More and more people began to think of the flag as their flag. They began to feel pride. They began to have hope. In 1994, Gilbert Baker designed another rainbow flag. This one was larger than all the rest. Women and men side by side carried the flag, a proud mile-long rainbow floating through the New York City streets. The flag wove through the streets, up and down avenues and boulevards and around city buildings. The people demanded equality. They demanded to be treated like everyone else. They demanded to live and love as they pleased. They were proud. They had hope. They would make a difference. More rainbow flags were made. Some were printed on bumper stickers and t-shirts. Others were hoisted onto lampposts on Halsted Street in Chicago. One was hung in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Soon the rainbow flag was flying in other countries like Brazil, England, Israel, Russia, Singapore, and Turkey. The rainbow flag now unfurled on farms, in suburbs, and in cities. The flag flew proudly outside public buildings, hotels, shops, restaurants, churches, and homes. And once, on June 26, 2015, the White House was awash in the colors of the rainbow flag. Equality, pride, hope, love. Harvey's dream became a flag for us all. Now we're going to do a little technical switcheroo here. Well, actually, Tom's going to do the switcheroo to another PowerPoint. But as he does that, that line about churches, flying outside churches, that it's so nice to be in an affirming, safe space like this. I don't know how many of you might be a part of this congregation, but I grew up a Southern Baptist. Oh, it gets worse. I went to a Southern Baptist seminary, got my master's degree. I worked in Southern Baptist churches. It gets worse. I worked in their publishing houses for 15 years as an editor and a product designer. I have a friend who says, I don't just have baggage, I have a matching set of luggage. And that's pretty much the truth. So of everything I've written all these years, Pride is the only book that I can tell you the exact day and almost the exact moment of inspiration. That inspiration was on this date, June 25th, 2015. Does anyone know the significance of that date? We just read it in the book.
The day before the Supreme Court.
Say that one more time.
The day before the Supreme Court.
Not the day before, but the day of. The SCOTUS decision for marriage equality. That marriage equality was the law of the land. And that night, to everyone's surprise, as the sun began to set, lights began to glow on the White House. This is the same day President Obama went to that church in South Carolina and sang Amazing Grace. When he flew back, this idea was brewing among his staff. They had it all set up, the lights were there, but he'd not yet given his final approval. When he landed back in D.C., he gave his approval. The flag was his, American flag, was lifted above the White House to signify that the president was in residence. And these lights began to glow on the north portico, which is known as the president's front door. Now, I never imagined that either of those things, the SCOTUS marriage equality decision or the White House being illuminated in rainbow flags, would happen in my life. I never even knew to dream those things. I never even assumed that they were possibilities. As I thought about that, I knew that students I taught, I just finished a year with fourth graders, I was going to start the next year in August with fourth graders the next school year, I knew that my students had probably seen rainbow flags. Kids all over the nation probably had, but they didn't know the history. And they didn't know why it was important to my community, the LGBTQ plus community. So I decided I would write about that. I never pictured myself as a nonfiction writer, but I decided I would write about that. And before the night was over, before the lights were turned off on the White House the next morning, I had the first draft of what would become Pride, the Story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag. Now, it's a nonfiction book, so of course I had to do some research, right? Some research has to go into that. But the first draft, a draft of my heart, was written that night because of that building being eliminated the way it was. That's a story in and of itself that I know the two people who were in charge of that White House event. They're going to be mentioned in a poem in a book I have coming out this year of LGBTQ heroes. They were the ones who helped plan the lighting of the White House. I thought we would start with some good news in a world full of bad news. And I think it was back in January that I received an email from a teacher. That's going to be really small, but I'll read it to you, okay? Dear Rob, I'm a first grade teacher from Fairweather Street School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who recently did a unit on banned books. Let that sink in. First graders, a unit about banned books. My students and I wanted, let me see how much it's showing. There we go. My students and I wanted to express our gratitude for your contribution to children's literature. Despite facing challenges in certain places, your work has had a profound impact on our students, first graders. They described your book as both a mirror and a window. We'll come back and talk about that. Providing them with a series of connections and validation while also offering insights into different experiences. Attached is a letter from one of our students. Thank you for creating literature that resonates with young readers and sparks meaningful conversations. We look forward to including more of your stories in our curriculum. Best regards, Amy F. Well, here's the good news. There are places where books are valued and read. There are teachers who are allowed to have conversations with students. There are parents who are not afraid of knowledge and information. And there are students who think, ask questions, discuss, and write letters to authors. I'll read this letter to you. Dear Rob, we're on a first name basis. Dear Rob, your book is amazing. Thank you for writing it. Your book is fun to read and should not be banned. Love, Logan. Thank you, Logan. And that's really nice handwriting too, I'll say. Over the years, I've read Pride to audiences from as young as 3 years old to 93. Each time I read, the reader takes away what they're ready to take away from the book. That's true of any book we read. We take away what we're ready to hear, even as adults. That's why when you read a book the second or third time, you get new ideas, new insights, new feelings that you didn't even remember from the first time. The 3-year-olds were gathered in the basement of a history center in New York City with their parents. We read Pride, and as we turned the pages, they pointed out rainbows and named colors. That's what they were ready to talk about. Second graders talked about unfairness. That's their biggest word in second grade. You can't go on the playground without hearing unfair, unfair, unfair. Fourth and fifth graders talked about how they and members of their family were part of the LGBTQ plus community. Those were my students that I had most of the year, and I didn't know any of that information until we read a book. Middle schoolers talked about how they still face discrimination. And they correlated that with what Harvey was experiencing. And one of those students told me that she read books like mine in the closet, literally, so her parents wouldn't know she was reading them. College students were surprised that they'd never heard of or learned of this history the whole time they've been in school. And I even had the opportunity to meet a couple of people who were actually there and knew Harvey and Gilbert and remembered that first flag. Often, there are readers who, for the first time, see themselves represented in a book. A librarian from my home state of Missouri told me about recommending Pride to one of the students in his elementary school. When the student returned the book, they said, "Do you have any more Rob Sanders books?" Tom directed them, to some other books, because I have several in this space. The next time the student returned, they said, "You have any more rainbow books?" And when they returned those books, the student asked, "Do you have any more of my books?" That's what seeing yourself in a book does. It changes from being the story of an author to being your story. From the first time I read Pride aloud to an audience, I was asked a question that I hear almost every time I speak. Why do you write controversial books? Now, this was asked by a friendly voice in the room who was anticipating someone else was going to ask this question. It was the launch of the book. We had nearly 200 people gathered in St. Petersburg, teachers, librarians, administrators. I was a teacher after all, friends, fellow writers, community members. So David asked, "Why do you write controversial books?" And I spontaneously answered that question in a way that has become my answer every time I'm asked that question. I don't write controversial books. I write books about history. History is not controversial. It's a fact. But not teaching history, now that's controversial. Now, for a dose of reality. Pride, according to PEN America, you've heard PEN America mentioned a few times. PEN America is an organization, I think, that's existed since the 30s, that works to make sure freedom to read around the U.S. and the world really is maintained. They announced last year that Pride was tied for first place among picture books that were most frequently banned. The other two I tied with were great books, I Am Jazz, about Jazz Jennings from Southern Florida, and the wonderful little book called Entangle Makes Three, which is a nonfiction book about 3 male penguins who adopted an egg and raised that baby penguin. Those were the 3 most banned picture books. Now, most of the bans we hear about and the data we see are about middle grade and YA books because they have what people might think are more controversial content. But picture books are banned too. Now, here are some facts from PEN America. And we just heard from Kent that American Library Association figures and PEN America figures may vary. But this is from 2022-23 school year, which is the latest data I've seen from them. They said that in that year, 3,362 instances of individual book bans in schools affected 1,557 unique titles. That was up by 33% from the previous year. I bet the next year will be even higher. The bans occurred in 33 states that year, with Florida leading the way. This does not include books that are challenged because they're often removed from the shelf while the challenge is taking place. It does not include books that are placed on a state list of acceptable books, which is what Florida has now. Every teacher in Florida scans every barcode of a book in their personal classroom library, and the librarian has to okay which books can and cannot be included. And this does not include books that are often placed where students have difficulty accessing them. Perhaps they're on a shelf behind the library or in a back room where you have to ask permission to get to them. So the numbers are higher than what they appear. Undoubtedly, you have heard and know that the vast majority of books that are banned and challenged are written by and about people of color and LGBTQ plus individuals. When you see things like Kent's slide that said, the different reasons people ban books, obscene, critical race theory, those are the excuses used to ban these kinds of books. Since I'm a children's author who writes nonfiction, among other things, and I'm a member of the LGBT community, and our books are frequently banned, I wanted to talk with you briefly about the history of LGBTQ children's lit in America. Trust me, this will all tie in, I promise. Maybe. Here we go. So children's literature, as we know it, is really an 18th century kind of invention. So when books started really being written for and about children. There have always been queer creators, be they editors, writers, designers, illustrators, because in every profession, my community is represented, we always have been. So we know there are queer creators, but for generations, the only characters that you saw in a book that you thought might be LGBTQ, or whatever you might have called them at that time, that was just implied or inferred on your part, never totally spoken out loud. Actual queer characters did not begin to appear in Kidlit until 1969, and that was mostly in YA literature. Here's an interesting fact. 1969 was the date of the Stonewall Uprising. Very interesting coincidence that these two major things were happening that year. So let me tell you a little bit about this book. The early books, there we go. These early books often approached homosexuality as a problem to be solved. They linked homosexuality with tragedy, or included characters who wondered if this was something permanent or just a phase they were going through. Those first YA books included things like I'll Get There, It'll Be Worth the Trip, The Man Without a Face, Ruby, and others. And then, over time, those YA books began to show healthy, self-aware LGBTQ plus characters, and began to introduce things like the intersection of race and sexuality, bisexual characters, teens in a normalized queer world, stories about coming out, creating community, trans teens, and books where being gay wasn't the problem, it was just a characteristic of the character, not something they were trying to solve. And I'm having a little trouble keeping up with myself here. And LGBTQIA plus characters and themes began to appear in picture books in 1989, 20 years after the first YA. The first being Heather Has Two Mommies by my good friend Leslie Newman. Leslie, first no publisher would publish this book. Leslie did what we would today call crowdsourcing to raise funds to do what we would call today self-publishing, which was not the norm back then. A publisher soon saw the book and signed on, started printing it and distributing it to a wider audience. In 1990, there was Daddy's Roommate. Both of these titles were immediately scrutinized. They were controversial. They were banned, banished, burned, everything you can imagine. I'm happy to report they're both still available in print and are still, as you would imagine, frequently challenged and banned. The first nonfiction book that I know of was this book by Gail Pittman called This Day in June, which is about Pride celebrations. That was released in 2014. So LGBTQ plus nonfiction is a relatively new thing. Then some of my books started coming out, like Pride in 2018. The first book about the Pride flag was the 40th anniversary of the flag. The next year, Stonewall, A Building an Uprising and Revolution came out. That was 2019. The 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, the first picture book about that subject. And I'm happy to say today, there are many, many books and authors and creators in this space, this LGBTQ space. I can't even keep up with all the books that are being released. Publishers have embraced these books and want them to be available to kids and to parents as well, teachers as well. So you may be thinking, what's that have to do with anything? Well, I think that history leads us to a question. Why are books with LGBTQIA plus characters and themes important? To begin that conversation, let's think back to that email from the first grade teacher. When writing about her students, she said, they described your books as both a mirror and a window. That idea was something obviously they were taught. They learned about mirrors and windows to where they could discuss it. And a mirror window varies by how you perceive the book and how it relates to you. The idea comes from the research and writing of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. The basic concept, and this may be an oversimplification, but the basic concept is that we all need books that provide us with mirrors, windows, and doors. The mirrors allow us to see ourselves and our experience. So they're books about identity. Windows are books that allow us to see into the lives and worlds of others who are different from us and learn about places, things, and experiences that we don't know about. They help grow empathy. Doors are those books that allow us to walk into the world of the book. They're books of imagination. Now, often, for a child, I think, no research for this, but I think often a book may start as a window, like for an elementary kid, and become later a mirror. Because if you're a second grader, you're probably not aware of your sexuality. That's not on your radar as a second grader. Are you gay then? Yeah. But you're not aware of that. Not aware of gender identity. Maybe that happens at different points in life. So that book that you thought was helping you see into someone else's life may actually be helping you step into your own life when you're ready to do that. And you can look back on that book in a different way. It's important to note, and I would be remiss not to say this, that Dr. Sims Bishop's research was focused on children of color, especially African American children, who were and are woefully underrepresented in all of KidLit. And when she was doing this research, very few African Americans or people of color were writing books, and certainly were not part of that big industry of publishing. So it was all about how not having those books affected kids. Over the years, people have begun to realize that research applies to all kinds of marginalized groups, and including LGBTQ kinds of groups. An editor of mine once said that my books were they were topics that were unrepresented or underrepresented. underrepresented. And I think that describes all of these books that relate to things Dr. Sims Bishop was saying. So, growing up in Springfield, Missouri, I was a reader all my life. From my first bookstore visit, in quotes, which was our local grocery store, where my mom bought me little golden books for 25 cents each. The first books I owned. To reading at home, some of you will remember Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Green Jeans, and Miss Jan from Romper Room, who read to us on TV. And some of you might have similar experiences to me. My family, can you even tell them that picture now? My family read every Saturday night, sit down with me to read my Sunday school lesson for the next day's experience at church. So reading was part of my life. At home and school and the library, I was immersed in a world of books and characters that showed people in worlds that were similar to mine, but weren't really mine. And I discovered nonfiction. From our 2 sets of encyclopedias, my mom thought that was helpful to have 2 sets, to my favorite book of 1-minute biographies, which I still own, to weekly readers. Does anyone here not know what a weekly reader is? It came to you weekly so you could read it. That's basically what it was. But it was nonfiction, right? What was happening in our country and in our world. But through all of these experiences with books and reading, I never saw myself in a book. I never saw that sissy boy as a main character. I never saw a boy who'd rather sing and create art than play sports as a protagonist. And of course, I never saw anyone who was the person I was becoming, a young gay man. So what does it say to a kid? What does it say to a kid when they don't see themselves in a book? It may communicate that you're not important, or that your existence is shameful, so shameful it can't even be written down, or that in all the recorded history, there was nobody like you. Consequently, you're alone in the world. This was never communicated to me. It was left to me to figure out what it meant. Well, all of that makes me think about and worry about queer kids today. If we really want to know why books with these themes and characters are important, we can reflect on some statistics from GLSEN. I don't know if you're all familiar with GLSEN. It's a national network of educators. It's one of those things where the letters used to mean something each, but now it's just used as the name of the organization. It's a network of educators, students, and local chapters working to create safe, affirming schools for LGBTQ students. They conduct an annual survey of school climate among LGBTQIA+ students. The last I have was 22-23. Here's some stats. 89.9% of students heard homophobic remarks such as fag or dyke. 81% of these students felt unsafe in school. 78.8% avoided school functions and extracurricular activities. That's where I thrived in high school. That's the only thing that helped me survive high school, was music, my choir, my music teacher, drama, speech. 58% of students reported hearing homophobic remarks from teachers and staff. Only 10% report that staff intervened most of the time or always when homophobic speech occurred. A little bit more. 71.6% reported that classes did not include any LGBTQ+ topics. 31.2% said they were harassed physically in the last year. 29.2% are not allowed to use their chosen name or pronouns. That number will be increasing. 18 or 16% had been prevented from playing the sports with a team consistent with their gender. That number will grow. 15.6% were prevented from writing about or doing school projects about LGBTQ plus issues. Let me pause. Roy Nichols, one of my English teachers in high school, in 1977 allowed me to write a report about LGBTQ topics. Nobody else knew it. My teacher and me, that I was researching that topic and trying to find information. Fast forward all these years, and students can't do the same. Here's some good news. 96.3% could identify at least one staff member supportive of LGBTQ plus students at their school. That's wonderful. But is it one or two or the whole faculty? I don't know. I hope that someone's working on a comparative study between states like ours that bans books, discriminates against trans youth, and those states that don't. I think the difference would be alarming to us. So this leads me to another question, an echo of the previous question. What does it say to a kid when they are represented in books, but they're not allowed access to those books? Or if they're part of recorded history, but they can't read or study or learn about that history at school? When you stop and think about it, that's probably worse than the not communicating that I grew up with, because this is communicating. Back then, I was left to interpret the silence, but today, kids are actively hearing adults, politicians, parents, pundits, school board members, governors, and others, not only ban books that represent them, but they also hear those adults demean writers, publishers, librarians, teachers, anyone who would dare provide those kinds of books. Well, if you're a queer kid and your books are being condemned and all the people associated with those books are being condemned, it's just a small leap to know that you're being condemned too. That's an awful message to carry around as a kid or to internalize. Now, I know you don't need to be reminded, but let me say it anyway. Books are not our enemies. Librarians and teachers are our friends. Words on paper will not change who we are, but they may change how we think and feel and act. The power of the right book in the right hands is unfathomable. It may even be life-saving. I began with some positive news. Let's end with some positive news. That we're not powerless in this situation. There are things we can do. I've made a little list, and after I made that list, I thought, I wrote a book about this. So I'll show you my list really quick, and then we'll end with a picture book. Let me take a drink. So here are some things we can do. We could brainstorm a whole lot more. You could and can attend school board meetings where a lot of these decisions are being debated. You can vote. You can provide safe spaces for members of the LGBTQIA plus community, like the place where we are right now. You can vote. You can provide banned books where kids can have access to them. Through many churches, synagogues, mosques are beginning to create collections of banned books where kids can come to this space, or community centers, or little free libraries, etc. A doctor's office. You can vote. You can write positive reviews for banned books. That helps authors and books a lot. You can vote. You can support bookstores who are in turn supporting authors and readers of banned books. And again, you can vote. But let me read to you one of my books. It was the second book, my second nonfiction. It came out right after Pride. It's short and sweet and true. It's entitled Peaceful Fights. And I don't have it on the screen. So to see the wonderful illustrations by Jared Andrew Shore, which are all cut paper, we probably have this out in the lobby. You can also see my copy. It's a compilation, really, of ways people have peacefully protested since the 60s. And they're all things we can still do. Here we go. Assemble, take action, create allies, make buttons, make banners, make bumper stickers too. Boycott, boycott, boycott. Chant, cheer, call someone, campaign, camp out, demonstrate, don't give up, don't give in. Educate, encourage, endure, be fearless, fly a flag, file a lawsuit, have faith. Give time, give strength, give money if you can. Shake a hand, lend a hand, have hope, be hope. Inspire, inform, imagine, invite. Join others on the journey. Join others in the fight. Knit a hat. Take a knee. Listen, learn, lead, light a candle, write a letter, pass laws. March, mediate, meditate, motivate. Never stop. Organize, organize, organize. Parade, picket, post, persist, persevere. Pray. Ask questions, never quit. Quietly do what's right. Read, remember, resist. Stand up, speak out, sit down, sing loud, be silent. Strike. Turn up the volume. Unite. Volunteer, vote, keep vigil, be nonviolent. Wear it, wave it, work for it, write about it. Explain change, exemplify change, expect change. You can only do what you can do, so do it. Be zealous. So, as we're wrapping up, I just want to encourage you to keep up the good work, the good fight, and scribbled something today, to work like the lives of readers depend on it, because very possibly they do. All right, we're going to have some time for questions. We have somebody with a microphone, or thoughts, or whatever else.
Questions. Was that the book you just read? I missed the title.
That's the book. I probably didn't say the title. Peaceful Fights for Equal Rights. That is the title. Thank you. Good self-promotion there, right? I don't even say the name of the book.
At a meeting across the field here, I learned that a particular board of member who has done tremendous damage to the children of Sarasota has made it clear we haven't banned books. But Xander mentioned they've pulled books. And as a former teacher, actually I'm still certified. Can you believe it? They're still going to certify me in Connecticut till 84. The thing is, I'd like to know if you know or where we can get a list of pulled books, and can we start using that term in our discussions? Pulled books is where a teacher is forced to pull books. I have a niece who's a teacher in Sarasota. And we buy books. I came here today. You buy books for the children.
Right. The day of me just sending a box of books that I've pulled from my shelves at home to a school. I could still do it, but whether those books will make it into a teacher's library or school library, I don't know. So I alluded to this earlier. I'll give you an example. So a teacher's class library is something they have bought themselves. And if you've been a teacher for years, you've been buying for years. And one of my friends who's been teaching for 30 years estimates that she has thousands of dollars in her book collection. So she, along with everybody else in Hillsborough County, which is where I live, had to scan every barcode of every book, that created a list that then the librarian or media specialist could compare to a list of approved books. That's, to my understanding, generated by the Board of the State Department of Education, and is used consistently. I know Hillsborough County didn't come up with that list themselves. So perhaps the State Board of Education is transparent enough to provide us with that list. All kinds of I don't have examples of this, but my friend Jennifer had all kinds of books that were really weirdly left out of her library. It may have been because nobody even thought of it. It's a 10-year-old book. It didn't make anybody's radar. But because it wasn't on that list, she couldn't have it in her classroom library or school library. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a question that you and authors all over the place, you and authors and other impressive people do what Harvey Milk did with the flag for the phrase LGBTQIA+, come up with a wonderfully descriptive word and make your place in history for coming up with that word.
It's a sincere request coming from a sincere place. But it is common, young people today use the term queer a lot to refer to all kinds of folks within the community. I grew up with that being a negative word. It's been re-embraced as a positive word. But part of our community is, and there's really more letters we could use, part of our community is to make it known that everyone can be a part of this community. You're a part of this community because the A means asexual and also means allies. So it's meant to be descriptive. Now you'll see people, it's not offensive to say LGBTQ+. You don't have to do all the letters. The plus represents everybody else. I have several prominent people like LGBT History Month is just called LGBT, no other letters. It applies to everyone. So as long as you're coming from a good spot and place in what you're saying, you can use the term that's most comfortable and works best for you. I doubt that anybody is going to come up with just one, but LGBT+, LGBTQ+, those are probably the most commonly used. Oh, I know. It doesn't necessarily roll off your tongue, does it? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else as we're wrapping up? I believe, David, if I'm correct, that there are books somewhere. There are two kinds of books. There are giveaway books.
Right. You're going to be book signing.
And then I'm going to be book signing.
You're going to be book signing right out the door here. With the copperfish people.
Okay. But you want to tell them about the giveaway books that we also have, just so no one misses that
In
opportunity?
case they don't know them?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, the giveaway book table, which still has a few dozen books on it, started with 400 some, is the table, how can I say this? The tables and the large tent just to the right of the ice cream truck machine. Does that help you? And so the road goes kind of this way, the dusty road, the ice cream machine is here, and then there's a tent with 3 or 4 tables. On those tables, flat, are beautiful giveaway books that used to be books in schools in Florida that got sent away, but we redistributed them to everybody today. It's a long story of how they came back, but please take one. We're saying to people, take one, and then we'll have some left for kids or whomever. So just so you know that. They'll be there for another hour and a half.
Thank you all.
So Michael Scanlan, who happens to be married to one of our key steering committee members who helped pull this Right to Read festival off, has also been a teacher of English and theater director throughout his career. In addition, he is the author of 12 plays for young adults published by Samuel French and has written the books and lyrics for 4 musicals. He received the New England Theater Conference Award for Excellence in Theater. He currently teaches English as a second language to immigrants and refugees in this Venice area. That's nice. Would you please welcome Michael Scanlan?
All right, my family is not allowed to hoot. You can't take them anywhere. Let me see. Worked already. First of all, I want to say very clearly, there's 2 words that could sum up the next half hour. Censorship sucks. It's a horrible, horrible way to control people. And in this, I happen to agree, and he happens to agree with me, with my favorite ex-president, Obama. Today, some of the books that have shaped my life and the lives of so many others are being challenged by people who disagree with certain ideas or perspectives. And librarians are on the front lines, fighting every day to make the wildest possible range of viewpoints, opinions, and ideas available to everyone. Barack, we miss you. I was born in 1952. I know I don't look that, but I was, in an Irish Catholic neighborhood outside of Boston. Thus, I feel like I have something to say about banned books because I grew up in a culture where everything was banned. Countless books, movies, television shows, other places of worship, sex, especially sex. This list could go on and on. My culture taught me that not only had bad actions were sinful, but that it was sinful to think about acting bad, which never made much sense to me. If you're going to get the same punishment thinking about something as doing it, you might as well just do it. And then I started to read. We had a little neighborhood, corner store library. It was the offshoot of the main library. Like most kids in my generation, I accepted everything I was told by the church. But then I started to read. This small branch library, I was probably about 11 or 12 when I was consumed by everything in print. Because of my age, adult books were unavailable to me. I was restricted to the children's section. This was in the days when young adult books didn't really exist. What the children's section did contain, however, were dozens of books about the lives of the Christian martyrs. These were exciting stories about people who defied their cultures and were killed for it. The killing took place in a variety of ways: burning, stoning, pressing, clubbing, beheading, skinning, choking. My favorite gruesome death was St. Lawrence, who was placed on a grill. After a short while, he said to his torturers, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." What a guy. Despite that these banned books contain horrible incidents of rape, torture, murder, etc., they were never banned. we were encouraged to read them. And then one day, having ingested all the books about the saints and martyrs, I stumbled across a strange book called Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Now, I wasn't interested. What 12-year-old boy wants to read a young girl's diary, right? But I had nothing else to read. There was nothing left for me, and there were no saints left to be uncovered. And I certainly wasn't going to check the book out. The title was too embarrassing, The Diary of a Young Girl. But since my options at this point were limited, I sat down to read. I read all afternoon. The next day I came back to read again. Then I summoned up my courage and went to the librarian to check out the book. She informed me that it was obviously a mistake. It was an adult book. It was misfiled. It was not available to me. Angered, I went home and asked my mother to lend me some money so that I could go buy a copy of the book. She did. I took the bus into Cambridge and bought my copy. Why was I so impressed and moved by this book? Until that time, I knew nothing about the plight of the Jews. I was fascinated by how they lived, their rituals, their belief system. It had opened the door to a whole new world for me, a world so different from the one I lived in. It also affected my view of religion. For the first time in my life, I realized that there were more ways than one to think about God. The diary left me overwhelmed, confused, and exhilarated. I started noticing things, like the numbers tattooed on the arms of the local fishmonger and his wife. Tattoos. There were Jews in my neighborhood? Who knew? At that time, these are a couple quotes from Anne Frank. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all of my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good inside. And finally, although I'm only 14, I know quite well what I want. I know who is right and who is wrong. I have my opinions, my own ideas and principles, and although it may sound pretty mad from an adolescent, I feel more of a person than a child. I feel quite independent of anyone. At the time, that book was not outright banned, but it certainly didn't appear on the shelves of my Catholic school library. And its history was facing censorship from the beginning. Over the years, the opponents of the diary continue to express the view that it was not written by a child, but had been created by her father as pro-Jewish propaganda. Others have tried to ban the diary here in our own state because they objected that it was too violent and had inappropriate sexual content. Sexual content? How had I missed that? Too violent? Boy, how could World War II and the Nazi extermination of the Jews be anything but violent? But I was on a roll now. I discovered that if I wanted to read books, I would have to buy them. So I got a little job at the local First National, carrying groceries home in my little red wagon for people who didn't have cars. The next book I bought was To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird, which was published in 1960, is told from the perspective of 6-year-old Jean Louise Fitch, whose father Atticus defends Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping a white woman, in court during the Great Depression. Despite proving Tom innocent, the jury convicts him of the crime. The book explains themes of racial injustice, gender roles, and the loss of innocence. So, like the diary, this introduced me to a whole other culture. There were no black people in my neighborhood. or maybe even my city. So I was fascinated by the characters. For the first time in my life, I understood the horror of prejudice and bigotry. I started noticing African Americans on TV and on trips to Boston, and I kept asking myself, how do they do it? How do they live in this country and in this world? Atticus said to Jim one day, I'd rather you shot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit them. But remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something. And I asked Miss Marty about it, and she said, your father's right. Mockingbirds don't do one thing except make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their heart out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. And my favorite line from Atticus, I wanted you to see what real courage is, instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see through it, no matter what. You rarely win, but sometimes you do. Harvey Leaves to Kill a Mockingbird has a long history of book banning and censorship. It holds the 7th slot in the American Library Association's top 10 most challenged and banned books list for 2017. And it also appeared in the 2009 and 2011 list. It has been challenged for the depiction of violence, offensive language, cruelty, and racism. Did they not understand that the point of the book was to show racism in its most troubled form? The next book I bought was Lord of the Flies. In Lord of the Flies, a plane crash during wartime evacuation, World War II, leaves a group of middle school boys stranded on an island. The plot may sound simple, but the story slowly degenerates into a savage survival of the fittest tale, with the boys brutalizing, hunting, and even killing some of their own. Lord of the Flies has been banned from schools over the years and has often been challenged. According to the American Library Association, it's the 8th most frequently banned book in the nation. Parents, school administrators, and other critics have decried the language and the violence of the book. Bullying is rampant and throughout the book. Indeed, it is one of the main plot lines. A major theme of the novel is that human nature is violent, that there isn't any hope for redemption for humankind. But in the last page of the novel is a quote from Ralph, the bad boy, the leader of the bad boys. Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of a man's heart, and the fall through the air of a true, wise friend called Piggy. Of course, being a fat kid and often bullied, I totally identified with Piggy. However, even at the age of 15, I did not see the book as a commentary on the violent descent of civilization. Rather, I saw it as a mirror of the world that produced Hitler and the Nazis. I still continue to believe in redemption. This is a quote from the author of Lord of the Flies. Girls say to me very reasonably, why isn't it a bunch of girls? Why did you write this about a bunch of boys? Well, my reply is that once I was a little boy, I have been a brother, a father, I'm going to be a grandfather. I have never been a sister or a mother or a grandmother. That's one answer. Another answer is, of course, to say that if you, as it were, scaled down human beings, scaled down society, if you had land, I'm on the right page.
Sure.
If you had land with a group of little boys, they are more like a scaled down version of society than a group of little girls would be. Don't ask me why, and this is a terrible thing to say because I'm going to be chased from hell to breakfast by all the women who talk about equality. This has nothing to do with equality at all. I think women are foolish to pretend they are equal to men. They are far superior and always have been. But one thing you can't do with them is take a bunch of them and boil them down, so to speak, into a set of little girls who would then become the kind of image of civilization or society. And the other thing is, why aren't there little girls and little boys? Well, if there had been little boys and little girls, we being who we are, sex would have raised its lovely head. And I didn't want this to be about sex. Sex is too trivial a thing to get in a story like this, which has about the problem of evil and the problem of how people are to live together in a society, not just lovers of a man and his wife. The whole book is posing the question. You think you've won a war? What you've really done is finish a war. There was a crime committed in that war, the like of which perhaps was never committed in human history. Think about it. According to the American Library Association, A Separate Peace was one of the top 100 novels of the 20th century that were banned or challenged. It was said to be banned due to it being a filthy, trashy sex novel and having offensive language. There was sex in this book? How did I miss it? I thought it was a beautiful and very complicated story about friendship. And now, we get to my favorite of all banned books, The Catcher in the Rye. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye is about a boy struggling to grow up in 1950s New York. The novel is narrated by the 16-year-old protagonist holding Caulfield from the bed of a mental patient's hospital. It begins with his expulsion from an elite private school, the fourth such expulsions in a year. After clashing with some schoolmates, he decides to leave school early and try to live on his own in Manhattan. But he battles the pull of adulthood. A key theme to this novel is that the loss of innocence that can happen in the process of growing up, according to Holden. All children are innocent and authentic, according to Holden, while all adults are damaged and phonies. While this mindset allows Holden to raise himself above his peers and feel better about the isolation, it damages his attempt at connection when he feels the pull of inevitable loneliness. Reaching out to strangers, an ex, a prostitute, all backfire, leaving him sad and angry and miserably alienated from adulthood. When I was 17, my then girlfriend and I absolutely loved this book. We read it together and would quote our favorite scenes. We started to talk like Holden. GD this, GD that. Like him, we were disgusted by the hypocrisy of the world's adults. We would emulate his world weariness and his refusal to conform. It was, for us, a book about rebelliousness and prepared us to face the world of late 60s in America and around the world. This book has also appeared in the AL list of 100 top banned books. Not surprising, since it was, to us at least, a clarion call to revolt against the way things were. There's a couple of quotes. This is my favorite about reading too. What really knocks me out, Holden says, is a book that when you're done reading it, you wish the author that wrote it was a terrific friend of yours, and you could call him up on that phone whenever you felt like it. That doesn't happen much, though. In the seminal passage. Anyway, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids. And nobody's around, nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody. If they start to go over the cliff, I have to catch everybody. In my senior year of high school, I finally found a poem by Emily Dickinson that exactly expressed my feelings about literature. There are a few antiquated words in this short poem. One of them is frigate, which means a boat, and one is coursers, which mean horses. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press at all. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. Dickinson clearly states what I learned about reading, that the power of books is in the power of transformation, to take you to people and places outside of your own experience. The important thing about reading books is that it elicits empathy in the reader. Empathy, unlike sympathy, is not that you feel sorry for what happens, but that you are part of what is happening. You're immersed in the story and you feel what the characters feel. I read all 5 of these books between the ages of 12 and 18, the most formative time in my life, maybe the most formative time in most people's lives. Book banners target this age group. They want you to be like them, not like the world you find in the pages of a book. George Bernard Shaw said, all censorships exist to prevent anyone from challenging current conceptions and existing institutions. All progress is initiated by challenging current conceptions and executed by supplanting existing institutions. Consequently, the first condition of progress is the removal of censorship. Through these books and countless others I've read, I am a Jew. I am a Christian. I'm a Black person. I'm a soldier and pacifist, a destroyer and creator, straight and gay, white, red, yellow, brown. I am a man and a woman, poor and rich, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, and tribalist. I am American and Nigerian, Israeli and Palestinian. I am all things and nothing. I am everybody and nobody. I am part of everything I've read, and everything I've read is part of me. Books are indeed the chariot that bears the human soul. And without books, banned and otherwise, I would still be that young man in the Irish Catholic neighborhood with a very limited worldview. Thank you.